This trip on the French Canal actually preceded our pilgrimage to the Canadian War memorials in northern France that Jenny and I presented rather emotionally back on, appropriately enough, November 11th. This canal trip was actually the reason we were in France, and while we're in France, we decided, you know, because we're in France, we decided to go visit the war memorials in northern France. This was on my second canal trip. We'd previously done a trip on the English canals in a narrowboat back in 2015. Made a presentation to Shellbacks on that, which is probably our in single digits presentations. And I wrote an article for Good Old Boat magazine about that trip, and I got a response from a reader who said he enjoyed the article, but asked whether we'd ever done the French canals. So that got us thinking about the French canals, and we were able to convince our good friends Jenny McEwan-Hill and Steve Hill. We're all involved in Able Sail at RHYC, and we were looking for somebody to do this trip with us, so we were able to convince Steve and Jenny to do it. And fortunately, Jenny's sister Anne joined us for this trip as well. And so the five of us, these five pilgrims that we referred to in the previous presentation, agreed to do this canal boat trip. Notice that we were quite proud of the fact we were Canadians, and we had a little Canadian flag, and we're proud of the fact that the four of us at least were members of Royal Hamilton Yacht Club. So we flew these flags from the flagstaff on the bow of the boat. The flag normally flown on that staff was the Locaboat charter company flag. We took that off and replaced it with our flag. And as Diane said, I'm going to do most of this presentation, but I'm welcoming everyone else, Steve and Jenny and Zaw and Anne, to leap in with any color commentary as we go along.
And they'll have to unmute themselves to do that.
Okay, Graham, thank you. The company we picked was Locaboat. There are two primary companies in Europe that charter boats on the canals, Locaboat and La Boat. The person that contacted me through Good Old Boat magazine actually recommended Locaboat, and he actually recommended the canal we ultimately chose. Our initial choice of canal actually was down here at the Lot Valley, because the photographs from Locaboat indicated it was a very picturesque area. But then we realized we wanted to get up to Vimy, which was way up here after the cruise, and that's an 11-hour drive through the whole length of France. At which point we said, that's probably not going to work. So we talked to the Locaboat, and they recommended the Nivernais Canal as well, which is right there. And they recommended it because it was, in their estimation, not only was it closer to Paris and to Vimy, but it was also, in their estimation, the second most beautiful canal in France, which of course raised the obvious question, what was their opinion of the first most beautiful canal in France? And they said the Canal de Midi down here was considered the most beautiful canal, which is actually a World Heritage Center, UNESCO World Heritage site as well. So we opted for the Nivernais Canal here, which is in the Burgundy region of France, which of course is famous for wines. And this is the detail of the Nivernais Canal. The two Locaboat bases were at Joigny and Corbigny, and we chose to travel the whole route, pick up the boat in Corbigny, and we'd go the whole length of the canal, which is 130 kilometers. Which in the way I think anyway, still is 80 miles, involves 63 locks and 9 lift bridges. The direction, I'm going to say the direction we chose, we didn't actually choose this direction. The only direction that was available to us by the time we changed our charter from the Lot Valley to the Nivernais Canal was to go from Joigny to Corbigny rather than the other direction. And this direction is actually upstream, which meant we're going uphill all the way. And that had some fairly dramatic ramifications that we hadn't really appreciated at the time. But since we didn't have any option, the only ones that were available, charters that were available, was to go to Joigny and Corbigny. That's the direction we went. And the other, I guess, crucial decision we made was that we were going to go from A to B. Our previous charters, such as the one in England, left from a base went around, different parts of the canal, then went back to the same base. But by going from Joigny to Corbigny, we had to cover that distance in 7 days. So that meant we didn't have a lot of time to stop and explore the countryside. But despite that, it was still quite a remarkable journey. The boat we chose was the Pinochet 1180 FB. The FB stands for Flybridge. It has an outside steering station here, and the 1180 refers to the length in meters, 11.8 meters, which again translates, in my way of thinking, to 39 feet overall, and an amazing 12-foot beam. And the boat was actually built in fiberglass in Holland, at the Locaboat production plant in Holland, and it has a very Dutch look to it, the very swept ends and bluff bow. It really exhibits her Dutch influence in the design. And she was, notice, festooned with bumpers and fenders. When we first took the boat on the canal, we took the fenders aboard, because I always am appalled by boats that travel around with their fenders over the side. But we soon found that putting fenders over the side and bringing them up, putting them back over the side for every lock we went through was not worth the trouble. We just left them over the side all the time. The interior of the boat was perfect for the 5 of us. It had 3 separate cabins with, count them, 3 separate heads and showers. It was designed for charter and served that purpose very well. They had 2 steering stations, an inside steering station and the Flybridge steering station. And I have to say, we never, ever used the inside steering station. But it was an exceptionally well laid out boat for our needs. And the galley had a full refrigerator, 2-burner propane stove, huge sink, a lot of counter space, and it was very well laid out. And the dinette area up here in the wheelhouse was where we ate all our meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner in that area. It was quite a nice vessel. We chose well. And we should actually, since we were talking about narrow boating, compare the French canal boats to the English narrow boats. And the main difference, of course, is in beam. The French canals are much wider than the British canals, and the French locks are much wider than the British locks, so the boats themselves are wider. That means you can squeeze a lot more into the available space. The boat we chose, as I mentioned, it had 3 separate cabins, 3 separate heads. The narrow boat we chartered in England, and I think the previous speaker spoke about narrow boat in England, only had 2 private cabins and only 2 heads, and had a single steering station, which was outdoors all the time, and was tiller steering rather than wheel steering. And any additional passengers had to use the convertible dinette for sleeping. But the biggest difference is the length to breadth ratio, which influenced how the boats handled. Of course, the English boats were tracked straight as a die. They had trouble turning them. We had trouble turning an English boat. The French boats tended to wander all over the canal because they were flat bottomed and did not steer well. The French boat had a bow thruster, and the British boat we had didn't. That's not to say we didn't see narrow boats on the French canal. This is a narrow boat that we passed going the other way. Very friendly, they waved to us, and but it really did look out of place. Now, I should mention that the other difference between the French and English canals not only was the boat type, but the people you met. In England, when we chartered our narrow boat, we really did feel part of a whole subculture of narrow boating, with a long tradition of roses and castles and this fine paintwork on the boat. And most of the boats we ran into were privately owned by Brits, who were either living aboard or holidaying on the boats. And the other boats we met were hire boats like ours, again, sailed by Brits primarily. In France, the majority of the charter boats we ran into were being chartered by visitors to the country, not by the French. We ran into a lot of Australians. We ran into a lot of Australians, Americans, Poles, Hungarians, but very few French. The whole tradition of narrow boating or canal boating generally is a British tradition. And the Brits actually reestablished the narrow boat or the canal boat holiday in France after they did the same thing in England. It was the Brits that came to France and started the crude charters on canal barges, and then that spawned the concept of narrow boating with charter boats in Europe. Oops. So we all flew into Paris and we rendezvoused at Joigny the night before we were to get possession of the boat. And Joigny is, I say, in the middle of Burgundy County, and you can see just, and this is the view from our from the patio of our hotel. Basically, we had a really delightful dinner the night before. One of the best dinners I actually had in France on this patio overlooking the River Yonne, and you can see the vineyards up here that dominate the countryside around the town. This is Burgundy country, famous for Pinot Noirs and Chablis. The local wine is the Côte Saint Jacques, which was quite palatable, I can tell you. The next morning, okay, we met with Natalia, our Locaboat representative at the Joigny Locaboat base. And the first thing she gave us was the recommended itinerary for the trip. She said, you're going to have to cover, this 130 kilometers in 7 days. Here's where I recommend you stop. And this is the route, this is the number of miles I recommend you do every day. And the other thing we talked to her about was we said, when we do these charters, we really like to have breakfast and lunch on board, but we really like to go ashore and have dinner ashore. And she sort of raised her eyebrows and said, you really shouldn't plan on doing that. She said, the area that you're going to be chartering is a somewhat depressed agricultural area. There aren't a lot of restaurants available in the towns that you're going to. You should, if they're available, fine, but you should plan on having your meals on board, having dinner on board. So that prompted another trip to the local supermarket, of course, to load up on provisions. And the next thing we did, of course, it was to be introduced to the boat. And the local Locaboat technician, Eve, got us all assembled on the boat and had us back the boat out of the slip. And this is our boat right here in the slip. He had us back it out. And the first thing he taught us, of course, was the use of single lever controls. It's a single lever control, forward for forward, obviously, and the further you pushed it, the faster you went. After reverse, and pretty simple operation. But he also pointed out that it was twin wheel steering. There's steering on the upper deck and steering below. And he emphasized that we should in no way have two people, have one person on each wheel with two people steering. He raised his hands and said, if that happens, it's catastrophe, he said. So we, and as it turned out, we never had anybody steering from the inside. The other thing he pointed out was that the importance of prop walk on these boats. Because they're single engine with fairly large props for turning at relatively low RPMs. He said prop walk is often more important than the rudder, especially when reversing for handling the boat. And he specifically said, if you have to make a 180-degree turn, sharp 180-degree turn to go back the other way, always turn to port, because that way the prop walk is pushing the stern to starboard and helps you. If you try and turn to starboard, it's a slower turn. And that lesson came in handy later, as I'll talk about. The other thing he talked about was the use of the bow thruster. So the bow thruster is very handy, but do not, in any circumstance, use it extensively because it will drain the batteries. And he said just use it by just punching the button and just giving a little kick. And then I asked about holding tanks and where we can get a pump out. And he, to our amazement, said, yes, there are holding tanks on the boat, but they're not used. All the heads pump directly overboard. And we said, oh. That's interesting. So we, at that point, decided we weren't going to go swimming in the canals. And that sort of made sense. I expect all the cities along the Yonne River, including Shoreline, probably pump their sewage into the river. Certainly, he did not contradict that. So it was a very educational process and got us used to the handling of the boat. And the one thing he did show us in quite graphic terms was the tachometer, which had these three colored lines on it, the green, orange, and red. And these lines represent specific RPMs, which represent specific speeds. And the red line, which is wide open at 2000 RPM, is 10 kilometers per hour, which is 5 knots. And we could only use that speed when we're on the river itself. And the orange line, which was about 1600 RPM, represents 8 kilometers per hour, which is 4 knots, and green is represents 6 kilometers, which is 3 knots. So it's 3, 4, 5 knots is our speed. And I said the red was used on the river. The orange, the 4 knots, was to be used on the canals, so we wouldn't kick up much of a wake. And the low speed, the 3 kilometers in 3 knots in green, would be used in the locks, approaching locks and bridges, as a speed where you had enough speed to still have some maneuvering, but was slow enough that it wouldn't be catastrophe if you hit the lock or the bridge. So our first day, we woke up that morning, I said, talked to Natalia, had a lesson on the boat. And the other most important thing we did that day was Steve and I drove cars down to Corbigny. Since we had to get from Joigny to Corbigny, we needed a car at the other end. And Steve and Jenny and Anne had the good sense to rent a large van that could handle 5 of us, plus our luggage. And so we drove that down to Corbigny, left it at the Locaboat facility down there, and then drove back while the ladies were out provisioning the boat. And but we still had time near the in late afternoon to take a tour of the town. And as you can see, it's a very pretty medieval town, very much on a hill, like all these towns, dominated by the local church. So this is the main street of Corbigny, and then if you walk right up there, as we did, you get to the town gates. And so we just explored the town and just had a relaxing time. And it was a typical medieval town. And it was actually fairly busy. We went into the local tourist office, and they admitted that the presence of the Locaboat station brought a lot of people to the town that would not normally come there. So it was more tourist oriented than certainly some of the towns that we visited. And here we are up at the top of the hill at the town gate. Being a medieval town, it was a walled city at one point. And we explored the interior of the local church and just got a feel for the ambiance of the town. That's Jenny and Steve. They're wandering around the church. And it was a very enjoyable afternoon just walking around the town. And then around, I guess, 2 or 3 o'clock, 3 o'clock probably, we were looking for a late lunch, early dinner. We stopped at this little restaurant, and we were served. The proprietor spoke no English, and of course, other than Steve, very few of us spoke any French at all, except high school French. And we had trouble communicating with him what was on the menu. But one thing we did recognize on the menu, which we're looking at here, was sausage. And so we all saucisse. And so we all ordered the sausage, and that reinforced our decision that we would not be eating ashore very often, because you heard the expression of you don't want to see how sausage is being made. Well, this sausage demonstrated exactly what was in it. It was not very well ground up, so it wasn't very appetizing.
The only thing that was missing was bone.
I swear I saw an eyeball staring back at me. So that decision reinforced by that lunch, as well as Natalia's advice, meant we were going to be eating aboard. And that certainly was not hardship at all, especially when Jenny volunteered to cook the dinners. There was no reluctance to let that happen, and Jenny did a superb job. And I should say, this concept of not having restaurants available had been reinforced earlier. When we talked about during this trip, and I was at a Shellback's presentation in RCYC, and I ran into David Weatherston, who had just finished a canal trip on the Midi Canal, and he commented on the fact that even on the Midi Canal, he found there were very few places to eat along the way. But as you can see from the table, we did not starve. We had baguettes and croissant and lots of cheese, lots of local wine, a lot of local meats. It was just from a culinary point of view, it was a phenomenal experience. The bread and cheeses available in France are just second to none. You steering and navigation. Here you're on a canal, which is only going, it's like basically being on railroad tracks. You only go one direction. So navigation, you'd think, wouldn't be a challenge, and you think steering wouldn't be a challenge. But the steering on these boats is hydraulic steering. And it was two wheels, so it's a fairly complex steering system. And the first thing we found out, from lock to lock, turn the wheel all the way to one side, turn the wheel all the way to the other side, is 7 turns of the wheel. So there's a lot. You turn this wheel a lot to make anything happen. And the first thing we did, of course, is put tape on the wheel to designate where top dead center on the wheel was. But that wasn't too much help when you have 7 turns of the wheel from lock to lock. You never knew where the wheel was. So that took getting used to. And the other thing, of course, these are very shoal draft, flat bottom boats and very bluff bows. So the directional stability on the boat is non-existent. So they tend to wander a bit. And the tendency is to oversteer. And it took us a while, each of us, and we all took turns steering, to become comfortable with the response of the boat, And after 63 locks and 9 lift bridges, we all became quite proficient with the steering and the judicial use of the bow thruster to kick the bow one way or the other. We all became very good at it. And the other thing that aided in the whole question of navigation was the Canal Guides, which were superb. This is the canal guide that we use for the Burgundy and Nivernais Canal. And this is the area here, area 11, that we're navigating. You see, this is book 11. And the canal book was exceptionally detailed. Here's just one of the pages out of the book. And it emphasizes this whole concept of Nivernais Canal and the River Yonne intertwined all the way down. Here's the River Yonne where we started. We left Joigny on the River Yonne, and then got on the canal at this point. You see the river just basically paralleled, if you can call this meandering stream, a parallel track to the canal. The canal tended to be straight, and the river wandered all over the place, which is the reason they built the canal, of course. And you can see here, there's a lock here, and a lock here, and a bridge here, and you see we've checked them off. And the book provided an immense amount of information. For instance, this is the page that was taking us into Marie-la-Ville, which is one of our stops later on. And you can see it shows all the facilities available at each stop, and it shows details the bridges that you have to go through, and it shows every lock, of course, and every bridge. And as we went along, we checked off every lock and every bridge we passed, because even if you're just on, you're on just a little canal, but you tend to, if you didn't check them off, you weren't quite sure where you were on the canal. And so we always had somebody steering and somebody navigating with the chart book open and a pencil to check off where we were. And the other challenge we had, other than steering and navigation, was this decision that was imposed on us that we're going upstream all the way. We're going up-locking all the time. That meant you entered the lock at low water. And the challenge there was to get the mooring lines onto the bollards, which were often above your head and set well back from the canal. And of course, you notice the bollards are only on one side of the canal, or of the lock. And we could never quite figure out which side they're going to be on until we were actually almost entering the lock and could see them. So there are always last minute decisions on what side we're going to be locking or tying off to. And we've just entered this lock, and this is a canal lock, and the canal locks tend to be deeper than the locks in the river. And this is the lockmaster here. He's closed the gates after we've come in. He's walking around to the forward gates. And when he got there, he would open the sluices, the gates, I guess, the paddles, I guess they're called in Britain. They call them the paddles, and let the water in. And this was the second disadvantage of locking up, was when he let the water in, of course, it created this huge amount of turbulence in the lock, which meant tying off was very important. The boat would get thrown around a lot. So the fact we were locking up meant that we had to lasso these bollards, and we were subject to this turbulence. But of course, once the water entered the lock, we would rise with it, and ultimately the lock would be full and would be at the same level as the water on the other side of the forward gates, and they'd open the gates and they'd let us through. But sometimes it didn't go quite as smoothly as that every time. And it usually meant that one of us had to get ashore to help put the lines on the bollards here. And you can see, and sometimes we wouldn't be as close to the wall as we would have liked to have been. And so this is me. Actually, you can see the lockmaster here. He's closed the gate on this side. We've just come in, and he's walked all the way around over the other gates to come back to close that gate. And here I am helping Anne get a line on the bollard so we can pull the boats into the wall. But Steve was inventive enough to develop this technique, this double coil toss, which was a lifesaver. Where you coil the line and split the coil in two halves with one in each hand, and the bitter end, of course, was already tied to the boat at the cleat on the bow or the stern, and then you put your foot on the live end on the deck. And then you toss the line. You can see the shadow here, and the goal was to have the line loop over the bollard, and then you pull in the live end, and you can have the boat, and then you pull the boat into the dock. And we figured this worked about, Steve, what, 50 to 60% of the time?
Yeah, something like that.
But it was a technique we picked up very early, and it was very helpful. And we should talk about the lock keepers, the lock masters, I guess. In England, you operate the locks by yourself, and it was a good way to meet other people, because there's always people there waiting to lock up or lock down, and so you met other boaters, and everyone, when they heard we were from Canada, everyone had a relative in Calgary. But in France, all the locks are operated by lock masters, lock keepers, and they varied from very young to very old. They're both genders. Some were more helpful than others, and some spoke English, and most didn't. We ran into one lock keeper, I think, spent a summer in Montreal, I believe, and so we had chats with them. But most of them were quite pleasant, and these young ladies were the most pleasant of them all. But after a while, we got into helping them out. We figured, actually, it had been explained to us by Natalia, as well as emphasized in the Canal Guide, that only the lock keepers could operate the paddles to let the water in the lock. But if they allowed you, you could help them at least open the gates to let the boat out. Because when we're tied to one side of the lock, and it's easy to get off the boat at that point, because when the water had risen in the lock, and so one of us could walk forward and open the gate on that side while the lock keeper was opening the gate on the other side, and we all chipped in and did that. We got quite proficient at it. This is Steve, Jenny, and Anne and I opening a lock gate. And once we got proficient at this, and we did get very proficient at it after 63 locks, we found we could get through a lock in about 10 to 12 minutes, which was faster than the British locks. The British locks were about 20 minutes, but because we had this rhythm going and we had a lock keeper, we can get through it fairly quickly. Oops. So those are the lessons we learned along the way. So after our initiation on the boat and the explanation and the last minute shopping to provision the boat, we set off on day 2 of our trip, which is day 1 of our voyage from Joigny to Auxerre. And this was 19 miles through 11 locks. This was our longest trip. And that went from here to here, from Joigny to Auxerre on the Nivernais Canal. We started on the River Yonne, and then we, as I say, alternated between the canal and the river all the way along. This photo shows us a lock on the river. You can see the amount of rise in the lock is less than the locks on the canal. And the locks would tend to be bigger on the river as well. Natalia gave us a lot of good advice. But one thing she sort of led us astray on, she said, well, you know, the first 2 days is going to be the longest, and that first day will take you about 6 hours, and the second day will take you about 5 hours. No way. The first day took us about 8.5 hours, and the second day took us 9 hours. They were long trips. And they say, because we were going from A to B in 7 days, we had to make this time. We didn't have time to dawdle. So we started on the river, which was a blessing because that gave us time to learn how to control the boat. And I say we alternated on the helm, and the process was whoever was helming would be relieved, and then he would navigate, and then the person who was navigating would go forward and do the bow lines. The person doing the bow lines would come aft.
Wasn't that organized?
It was that organized. We were a team. We had a checklist. Anyway, the river was valuable because it did teach us how to steer that boat, which was certainly a learned experience, but we all mastered it. And the river itself was very pleasant. You know, we were doing 5 knots on the river, and you know, our own boat was a C&C Corvette. You know, our cruising speed was 5.5, so doing 5 knots on the canal boat was not that much different than what we would do on Trillium. And this is us in one of our early locks on the river. And this is where we got led slightly astray by one of the locals. The boat behind us here was also from Locaboat. He left just after us, and he locked through after us in most of these locks. And we started chatting to him. He was French, and he spoke very little English, none. And we spoke, of course, spoke very little French. And he was an older gentleman with 2 younger women. He was having an enjoyable time. And somehow he communicated to us that it was appropriate for us to tip the lock masters and the lock keepers. Here's one of our lock keepers here walking down to open the gates, and he said it would be appropriate to tip them. That's what we picked up from him. And so he said, oh, well, what did we tip? You know, and everyone, of course, had spare change. Majority of the spare change was euros. And 2 euros, like toonies and the loonies over here. And so we opted to tip them with euros. And if we didn't have any euros, we tipped them with a 2 euro coin. It's only later that this French gentleman who was telling us to tip was actually tipping with cigarettes, not euros. And after 63 locks, i.e. 63 euros, we found this was not an inexpensive way to show our appreciation to the lock keepers. So once we made the transition to the canal from the river, things we obviously slowed down to 4 knots canal speed, which was about a brisk walking pace. People could walk by us quite quickly. And the other thing you notice is every canal had a towpath. This towpath was used originally, of course, by the horses and oxen that towed the boats in the 1840s. This canal was built in the 1840s. I should mention the canal was built specifically to bring lumber, firewood specifically, from the countryside to Paris, to fuel Paris during the winters.
It's also wider than an English towpath, which
Yeah.
was a path.
Yeah.
This is a roadway.
Yeah, the paths over here were wide enough actually for vehicles. The lock keepers used to travel back and forth on these paths with their small cars. And the paths actually became, in modern times, when they revitalized the canals, became bike paths. And so we saw a lot of cyclists doing tours of France on the canal, and they would they would pass us regularly, and we had all these bikes passing us, usually waving to us and going obviously much faster than us in either direction, and they were having a gay old time. But the other thing we noticed is that when you went under a bridge on the canal, a lot non-lift bridge, these are fixed bridges, the tow path obviously went around the bridge structure to allow the horses and oxen to get around. And when that happened, when they went around this, the tow ropes would chafe on the edge of the bridge. And you can see here, the tow rope, because when the boat was slowing down to go under a bridge, they back off the horse. The tow rope would dip down onto the tow path, pick up gravel and dirt and debris, and then become very abrasive. And when it bent around the bridge, as it would have to do as the horse went around the bridge, it would left these grooves all the way along at every bridge in both directions, which again illustrates the if you want to call it antiquity of the canals and how they were used originally by horsepower and oxen power before steam. And of course, it just like the British canals in the actually between the wars and after the Second World War, they fell into decline. And again, it was the Brits that actually brought them back to life. Here we are at another deep lock. And you can see again the challenge of getting from here around those bollards without having to actually get off the boat. Generally, if we couldn't toss it around the bollard and the lockmaster was otherwise occupied and closing gates and whatnot, somebody, usually me, would stand on the stern rail, get high enough to clamber up over onto the higher lock and get the lines on the bollards to stabilize the boat while it's going through the lock. And here's Steve and Jenny on the aft position. And in here, see here, quite often we just tie off on one bollard, especially if there's another boat in the lock that was taking up a lot of space. And tying off on one bollard worked as well. And quite often the lock keepers, if they helped us, would just put us around one bollard because that was easier for them, rather than trying to get back and forth to two. And the real estate along the canal, as Natalia told us, was primarily rural, but there were some impressive houses along the way, some of them quite old, and generally set back from the canal, there'd be a chateau or two along the way. And this is a little piece of real estate that we noticed as we were approaching Auxerre. Quite a nice piece of countryside. And this was late August, early September. I think it was late August.
It was like 90 degrees.
It was hot.
When
It
we
was 90
started.
degrees, and most of us brought hats, but Zah noticed that she didn't bring a hat, so she used her umbrella as a parasol for a good part of the trip, which served the function quite nicely. And as we approached Auxerre, we noticed the cathedral on the horizon. Again, all these small French towns, medieval towns, were dominated by churches and cathedrals. This was actually one of, I think, 3 fairly major churches
We
in
can
the
see
south.
the 2 spires. And
Yeah,
then the
yeah,
major
actually 3.
cathedral.
There's 3 spires showing here. And this cathedral here, which we visited later, is of note because it's where Joan of Arc celebrated Mass in 1420 after beating the English at Orleans. So these towns go back a few years. And these are 3 charter boats entering the canal in the lock before Auxerre. And all these 3 boats had left from Locaboat the same time, actually slightly before we did, because we had to go to the supermarket to do some more shopping before we left. Here we are in the lock, about to enter the town of Auxerre. And you can see again, because we're in the river, the amount of rise in the lock is not as great as it was in the canal. This town of Auxerre was just a gorgeous town. This is us on the wall, right in front of the city. And right along here was a row of restaurants. This was actually Saturday night. So the town was, on Saturday night, was fairly busy. And you can see, this is a boatyard over here, and these are all the local canal boats. None of them were actually in use when we were there. And here we can see these are crewed excursion canal barges where you can go and have, that actually have a crew dinner and enough accommodations for several passengers on board. And that's where the French canals actually got back in the business. The Brits would come over, get some Dutch barges, bring them down, refurbish them, and turn them into floating hotels and travel the French canals with paying passengers. We visited the church that Joan of Arc had celebrated Mass in 1620, which, considering this was 2019, was almost 600 years ago. That's sort of, I found that very impressive. 600 years ago, she celebrated Mass. And then across from where we kept the boat was this line of local restaurants. We went up to them and asked to make a reservation for dinner, and they looked at us and said, shook their heads and said, no, there are no reservations left, or we're sold out. It's Saturday night. And so we went back to the boat. But then it turned out later in the evening, they actually closed the road in front of the hotels, the road between the canal and the restaurants, and they set up tables on the road and invited us for dinner. And we had an enchanted evening sitting literally in this closed road in the waterfront of Auxerre with its very crowded scene, very active, and had a exceptional meal. And this was the only time on this trip on the canal boat where we actually ate ashore, and it worked out quite well. We wandered through the town to have a look at it, and we found the town was very empty. We walked around and we didn't run into many people at all. And this was to become the norm for most of the towns we stopped at, with the one exception of Clemcy. All the towns we stopped off were almost devoid of people. Auxerre was a large, I'd call it a city. It was a very large local population, but in the downtown area, there's very few people. And this is just a shot of this city taken the morning we left. And you can see, there's one person there sort of setting up tables. This was Sunday morning, so perhaps everyone was in church.
Between 8 and 8:30.
But there was not a lot of people around. And again, that would become the norm in the other towns we'd stop at. So day 3 of our trip and day 2 on the canal, we went from Auxerre to Mally-le-Ville, 18 miles, 16 locks. Again, Natalia told it would take us 5 hours, and it took us closer to 8.5. And this is the bridge that you go under as you leave Auxerre. And you can see the bridge is marked, which arch you should go through. And that was information that was available in the guide as well. Leaving Auxerre, this is the church that we visited the day before, cathedral, I expect, and the lockmaster closing the gate behind us. And it was quite amazing. The lockmasters always had cell phones available, and a lot of them were on cell phones themselves. Actually, later in the trip, we ran into a lockmaster who didn't have a cell phone, and I think Steve had to lend him his or something to so he could communicate with the next lock. That lock, I think what they were doing was letting the lock upstream, letting us know that we were on our way and to prepare the lock for us. And so in that regard, we were thankful. And here's the bridge that we had in the previous slide that we went under with the channels marked that you can go under. And the other thing to notice here is how well maintained the locks were. They always had flowers around them. They're always very well maintained. The French government was putting money into this system. However, in the second day, it was the only day we had rain. And so the parasols got turned into umbrellas for that day. And even locking through, it was just a slight drizzle. It wasn't anything torrential downpour. But the bow crew were hard at work getting the bow lines on. And you can see other flags flying here off the bow staff. And we're locking up again, as we always did. But every day we stopped for lunch, and that was not necessarily our choice. The locks themselves closed an hour every day for lunch. From noon to 1, the locks were closed. And so that added basically, often added an hour or 40 minutes to our trip, just waiting for locks to open. But that wasn't hardly a hardship. There's always docks available near the locks, like this one here, that we could tie up to. spread a very nice repast of baguette and what do we got? Plenty of cheese over here, some fresh, some cut meats here, some fruit and vegetables that I think I've mentioned we did eat well. And actually, if we were at a lock just before lunch, quite often the lock keeper would ask us if we were planning on continuing, and if that was the case, he would notify the next lock that we're on our way. And sometimes they'd actually leave the lock gates open and the lock prepared for us, and so when we arrived, we'd actually just go right in the lock and have lunch in the lock. And then when 1 o'clock came, they'd come close the gates and lock us through. And here we are locking through a canal, or a lock on the canal again. You notice the bollards set well back from the edge of the lock, which meant we had to toss the lines. Very pretty lock, a lot of flowers around it, well maintained. But being on the canal, very deep lift, and the lock master's here about to let the water in. And she's letting the water in. You can see the turbulence at the front of the lock, and we're up to the level of the next part of the canal, and she opens the gates, and then we can go out and get on our way. Mentioned that it was a very pastoral area, very agricultural. We ran into, I call these brown and white cows. I think they have a more technical name than that. And the other thing to notice here is the fact that the canal is actually at a higher level than the surrounding country. The canals often did this. They built embankments to raise the canal in order to avoid having to put more locks in. It was easier to build a embankment than build locks. And so often the canal, you look down from the canal around the surrounding countryside. So we arrived later in the day at Mally-la-Ville. This was probably closer to 4 or 5 o'clock. You can see the sun is starting to get lower in the sky. And it was just a gorgeous little town. Just a little pretty riverside town. And we were the only boat to stop there for the night. These are local boats, local canal boats. And we had our whole dock to ourselves. And I don't think we even had to pay for that dock. And most of the docks we didn't have to pay for. In Nozaire, we had to pay for the dock. This one we didn't. But again, just a really, really pleasant, well-kept area. And like I say, we were the only boat on the dock that night. But early in the evening, late in the afternoon, this vehicle drove up to us and asked if we needed any supplies. And they were selling breads and jams and vegetables and tomatoes and whatnot from their local produce. And so we loaded up on some more bread and jams and some vegetables. And it was actually a well-timed stop, because I don't think there was anything open in this particular town to buy anything.
No.
So next morning we enjoyed our fresh croissant and jam on the after deck of the canal boat. This was the flybridge area, which had this table that you could extend, and we used that for dining on deck when we weren't dining inside. It worked out quite nice. And this is the town. Again, nobody around in this particular town. Very few, if any, stores open, and occasional car, but you saw nobody on the streets. It was quite amazing. So day 4 of our holiday, day 3 on the canal, was our shortest trip, shortest day. It was 9 miles and only 16 locks, and we were going from 6 locks. What did I say?
16.
Oh, 6 locks, yeah, sorry. And we went from Mally-la-Ville to Chateau Saint-Soir, but the Canal Guide had suggested we stop at Mally-le-Chateau, which was just a short way from Mally-la-Ville. And what you can see here is the limestone cliffs that exist on this section of the canal, which is the reason this canal is considered the second most beautiful canal in France, because of these limestone cliffs. And so once we cast off from Mally-la-Ville early that morning, we stopped at Mally-le-Chateau, and that's the chateau up there on the hill. Steve, Jenny, and Anne got the bicycles out. And I should point out, we originally planned to have 5 bicycles, and we actually, on our charter agreement, asked for 5 bicycles because there was 5 of us on board. And our Natalia, our Locaboat base operator at Joigny, looked at that and said, 5 bicycles. I don't think you're going to need 5 bicycles. You got to cover a lot of ground in 7 days. You are not going to have much time to go looking around the local community. I don't think you need any more than 3 bicycles. And that's only if anybody wants to sort of ride along the bike path while you're going down the canal. 3 would be plenty. And she was right. We never really needed 5. But this particular day, Steve and Jenny and Anne took the 3 bikes and rode, I should say, pushed the bikes uphill to get to the chateau while Za and I walked. And that's me there. One of the few pictures with me. And
We walked up a curving road.
yeah,
to
the road
begin with.
actually went over this bridge and then up along here amongst the trees and then up there around up to the top of the chateau. And as in most towns, there's not a lot of people around. We did find a boulangerie, I believe, and stocked up his bread. We found a variety store because I was desperate in need, looking for some 2-way batteries for my camera. And we found a little store that sold 2-way batteries. And at the top, an amazing view of the countryside. The wall at the top had this little colored map embedded in it that showed you what was around the area. And you know, look down from the wall and see the canal below us. This is one of those canal barges, crude canal barges that would take passengers for a week's cruise and provide all the food and the lodging for say 5, 6, 10 people, which is the way the canal system was reborn in France. So we found our way back down. Steve and Jenny and Anne, that's Anne back there, rode their bikes downhill, which was easy. So and I found a path that actually led down from the top and came out right about over there. And so we all rendezvoused on the bridge and made our way back to the boat and then started back on the river again. We're on the river. And I recently included this shot, other than showing Za and Anne, was it's this great shot of this umbrella. This was the only shelter we had on the flybridge. And I should say we steered from the flybridge in the rain or the sun because the view was just so much better than the inside steering. You can see the single lever here, control here, wide open, that redlining at 5 knots here because we're on the river. But if there's any sort of breeze, this umbrella became quite unstable because the only thing holding it up was a plastic base that was full of water. Leaky plastic base that was full of water. And so it would not take much to topple this umbrella. And one time it did topple overboard and it toppled over astern of us. And I was steering at the time. This is where Eve's sage advice about how to do a sharp 180-degree turn came to the advantage because I just put the helm over to port rather than starboard, gunned the engine, and the boat turned basically very quickly in a very short time back going our way. And then Steve got the boat hook, and with the help of Anne and Jenny, we retrieved the umbrella. And more than that, we were able to, with Steve's adroit use of the boat hook, we were able to retrieve the white plastic cap off the top of the umbrella. So nothing was lost overboard. We didn't have to report any lost pieces to the charter company once we got back. So that was quite an adventure.
That was the last we used the umbrella.
Yeah, we put the umbrella away after that. Certainly when the boat was moving, because we had to drop it when we were going under bridges anyway. So, as I mentioned, this area of the canal is probably the most picturesque and probably one of the well-known areas. Because at this point, we're entering what they call the Sousseau region of the canal and of France, with all these eroded limestone cliffs. And this was not a lock. This was a little narrowing of the canal going into this area. And you see behind Anne and Za these remarkable cliffs. And of course, as we went by, they became even more picturesque. Which meant all the cameras came out. We started taking pictures of these cliffs, and you can actually, if we had time and could stop in this area, you can actually walk up on top of the cliffs and look down on the canal. I should mention that our canal boat heroes are Timothy West and Prunella Scales. They have a program used to have a program on Channel 4 in England, which is now available on YouTube, called Great Canal Journeys. And one of the canal trips they took was on the Nivernais Canal, going the other way, going downstream. And they spent some time in this area. So if you want to even get a better view of what was going around here, go on YouTube and look for Great Canal Journeys Season 1, Episode 3 or 4, I think, where they do the Nivernais Canal and spend some time in this area. By this point, we were becoming quite proficient at locks. We're very casual about it, as you can see, Zaw on the foredeck there. Things were, despite what Zaw said, we were a well-oiled machine at this point. We rotated between positions and we were able to do things quite well. At this point, Steve was practicing his French and at the same time tipping the lockmaster. So he would go over and chat with the lockmaster, and usually about what was ahead of us if we had to watch out for anything. But it gave him, Steve, I must admit, was the most adventuresome person in practicing his high school French. We didn't get much beyond that. So we arrived at Châtel-Saint-Soix early in the day. I could say this was our shortest day. And so we got there early afternoon. You can see we're the only boat there, only charter boat there. This is a local boat. And we tied up along the quay. And then pretty soon, other boats started to arrive. And one of the first boats to arrive was this boat from the competing canal boat company, Locaboat. This is a group of Americans from the Tread Avon Yacht Club on Chesapeake Bay. And they go every year, they go off to charter somewhere. Previously, they chartered in Sweden. This was their first ever canal boat trip. And they picked up their boats at the Locaboat base at Tannay. And
like 3 or 4 of them.
And there's 6 of them. There's 6 boats. And this boat was remarkable. It was captained by a Chesapeake Bay tugboat captain and pilot, Chesapeake Bay pilot. And he brought this thing in beam 2 without a bow thruster. The bow thruster wasn't working. He maneuvered the boat in, got it beside the dock in a remarkable manner. And they were very interesting people. They're, let's say, they've been traveling all over the world in different charters. And this was their first canal boat trip. And so we started comparing notes on canal boat trips and started comparing boats. They came aboard, our boat looked around and thought our boat was in much better shape than theirs. And that's one of the reasons we picked Locaboat, is we heard that Locaboat was not as well-run a company as Locaboat. And that seemed to be confirmed by what we heard from these people. And that's our boat there, Tanley, and all the boats in the Locaboat operation were named after wine regions or wines. And Tanley, I guess, was a wine region around this area. And these are two of the American boats from Locaboat, from Tannay. And the other thing we noticed, when we arrived, we were the only boat there. We tied sideways to the dock, and then other boats started to arrive, and they started to Mediterranean more rather than side 2. And this was a far more efficient way to squeeze more boats into a tight area. And all they do is bump the swim platform, the stern platform, up against the wall. Sometimes they put a fender between the two, and then just tie the boat to the bollards on shore and just let the bow drift. There's no current basically in this area. So tying the stern off meant you could just Mediterranean moor, step off the boat easily, and crowd a lot of boats into this one area. We saw this being used a lot, although we never did it ourselves. So that evening we had our cup of tea on the after deck, as we normally do, as the sun was setting, and we would go off and explore the local town. So the next day, which is day 5, day 4 on the water, we went from Châtel-Saint-Soix to Clemenceau. And Clemenceau was the most active. Clemenceau, sorry, yeah. Was the most active town that we met on our way. And it was 12 miles, a shorter day, but 8 locks and 2 bridges, 2 lift bridges. You know, we always went through a number of fixed bridges, but these were lift bridges. And that involved a new technology for us. And this is a good example of a lift bridge. This is the first one we ran into shortly after leaving Chateau Saint-Soix. And all the bridges involved docking, actually. They had always had a small concrete dock in front of before the bridge. Somebody would get off. Steve, in this case, would walk over, open the panel on the bridge, push the up button, and the bridge would come up. And then what would happen, of course, is that generally we would cast off from the dock, go through the bridge, go to the dock on the other side. After we got through, Steve would lower the bridge and then walk over to the boat, hop in the boat, and we'd get on our way. And in that respect, bridges actually took a little more time than locks. But what you see here, Steve is lifting the bridge, and here's a boat coming this way, and this turned out to be one of the American boats that had got held up leaving Tanay because they had trouble getting rid of their rental car. And he was coming, and he's noticed the bridge being open. So he just took full advantage of it and came right through, which was no problem at all because that speeded up the whole thing quite significantly. He didn't have to wait for us; he came through, and they all had their. And every year these people would all get the same hats, baseball caps. In this case, they were all red to celebrate the fact they were doing a French canal journey. And you can see the number of fenders on all these boats because you can see how tight the bridge is. Opening the bridge was barely any wider than the locks, and they're concrete, of course. And all these boats are fiberglass. Unlike the British canals, which had steel boats, most of the charter boats on the French canals are fiberglass. So that's one reason why they're festooned in these fenders. And if the bridges were close enough together, and a couple of times they were, rather than picking up the person who opened the bridge, that person, after they'd closed the bridge, would just jog ahead to the next bridge. So here's Jenny, her brisk trot from going from one bridge to the other, and then she got to there and opened the next bridge. And this bridge, as you can see, certainly is not fit for vehicular traffic as the pedestrian bridge. And it was one of the few wooden ones we saw. Most of them were steel. And so she would open that, we would go. Again, you can see how tight the opening is, usually involving a quick touch of the bow thruster to get the bow over to get through properly with pumping. And we always stop for lunch, as I said, and this, because the lock's closed. And here we've come through. This is a weir. This isn't the lock. They could close this weir in case there's any flooding. We came through, picked up the dock available because there was a lock in front of us, had lunch. And again, it was not an unpleasant experience to have a stop for lunch and have a nice lunch below of fresh baguettes. And I should mention, the baguettes were so fresh that if it was a day old, we refused to eat it. We day old baguettes to the ducks because it was beneath us.
Because you could always find a bakery.
Well, what are the French bakeries called? The
Boulangerie.
Were always available, except for that one town. And so back on the river, we could open it up to full 5 knots and make some time. And the other thing we noticed when we were on the canal is there's a number of weirs we passed where the canal would empty into the river. And the river was often quite right next door. And then this is visually an amazing experience. This looked like an infinity pool. The water would just, the canal would just come to an end and then just spill over into the river. And it was really quite a surreal experience because you can see it had this mirror-like surface of water just sort of spilling over into the river. And we passed a number of times that happened on the canals. You can tell it's a canal because it's got the towpath. And so then we entered the town of, what town was this? This was Clemson. Let me say Clemson.
Clumsy.
Which, as I said, and you can see the weir over here. This is the weir with the canal next to it. This is the lock going into the town. And this was probably the busiest town we went to. It had a phenomenal supermarket. It had all the facilities we need. The stores were open. It was quite good. So we entered the lock. And this was one of the more challenging locks to get on the bollards. You can see the bollards are hidden in the bushes here. There's no bollards on this side. They're on this side. We came in and we had no idea what bollards are. I had to hop off again, stepping on the stern rail, hopping out. I took this picture, and the bollards are hidden in the bushes, so I had to get the lines on the bollards. And then the lock keeper closed the gates behind us, and it proceeded to the front. And another charming lockmaster welcoming us to the city of Clumpsy. And behind her, you can see the quay. This is the harbor of the town. That's where we're going to go. So we didn't have very far to go. We just went in the lock,
Hard right turn.
and did a hard right turn and do a quick 360 using or 180 doing the bow using the bow thruster. And we ended up here on the wall in the town, and it was a beautiful town. And both these are charter boats as well. This is the new style of charter boat that Locaboat is adopting. This is the older style. This is the new style that they're adopting. And this part of the canal, this part of the harbor, used to be the old canal. The old canal used to go right through the downtown. Then later on in the 1800s, they filled it in the town to get more city streets, and then the canal bypassed the town. And again, the purpose of this canal was to transport lumber, wood, to the city of Paris in order to fuel the city during the winter. I say this town, even though there weren't a lot of people around, the stores were open. You know, this boutique was open, this was open. We had just bought something. I think it was some food supplies, I'm not sure which, and we were walking around town. And like all these towns, they were, 600,000 years old. The buildings were exceptional. This was, I call this Tudor architecture, but obviously in France it's not called Tudor. And this place obviously was available. It's for sale. So we took a look at it, but decided to pass on it. But the towns were just extremely old medieval towns. Very pretty, but again, not well populated, except for this town. We went to visit the local church, of course, which is remarkably well preserved. When the lock keeper, when we came in, the lock keeper was, I think, the local visitor center as well, because we went to chat to her about what was available. She gave us a map for a walking tour of the town. This is what Anne's holding here. We did a walking tour of the town. Behind her, you see the stairway here going down to the old town. And we took a walk around, which was really quite illuminating. And we found out where the supermarkets were and where the stores were. And we even found an ice cream parlor that was very welcome. And this is the bridge we crossed under to get into the town. And we noticed a statue on top of the bridge. So later that day, we walked over to the bridge and had a look at the statue. And here is the lock behind us that we entered the town with. And this statue was there to honor the flotteurs de Clumpsy. Flotteurs, that's what it says there.
Floater.
And these were the log drivers. These are the the French equivalent, the Canadian log drivers. These are the people that ran the lumber down to the city of Paris, ran the rafts of lumber down. They'd tie these rafts, the lumber into rafts that were big enough to fit into the locks, and then lock down to the city in the 1840s. This was actually a fairly late canal. It was built in the 1840s. And again, this is a monument to those people. The whole town of Clumpsy was essentially founded around the lumber industry to get the lumber to Paris.
They got to Paris, and then these guys walked home.
Yeah, it took them several days to get to Paris, obviously, downstream, I should add. And they had to turn around and walk back and pick up another load of lumber going down. And the town, very pretty town. The supermarket, I think, was just up that street or that street. I'm not sure which. It was very well stocked, and we loaded up on cheese and bread and wine, all the local wines. We got actually very discriminating about the wines. We figured the 2017 was better than the 2018, and but enjoyed it very much. So the day 6, day 5 was 12 miles, 8 locks, and 1 bridge going from Clumpsy to Tannay. 12 miles, again, not a long run, and not too many locks and only 1 bridge. So it not a hard day. And Tannay was the Locaboat terminus for the competing charter boat company. And this is again, more cattle. We just, so there's cattle and
And what-
horses.
And what is their name?
These are, I'm told, Charlets.
That's it, Shirley, right?
So I learned a little bit about cattle. And again, there's very much a rural area of Paris. And Steve and I noticed that when we drove down, we delivered the car down to Corbigny. We're driving through field after field of farmland and crops, and it's a strange orange colored texture to the soil too. Here's back on the canal, towpath on this side, and the amount of mistletoe. We saw all sorts of mistletoe on this trip. Again, back in the canal, we had to throttle back to the orange line on the tachometer, which was 4 knots, I think 8 kilometers per hour. But again, more deep locks. Just again, the challenge of getting that rope on that bollard from that location, the double, Steve's double coil toss was invaluable for that. And failing that, we had to get off. And some people actually docked at the ladder, so they climb up the ladder to get up the lock. We never actually used the ladder that much. We could just clamber ashore. But always time for a cup of tea, even when locking through. It was a very, we were traveling at a very sedate speed, walking speed most of the time. It was a very comfortable and relaxing way to travel and see the French countryside. Very little stress up to that point until we got here.
Oh.
This was the other adventure we had. This was a lock that we had to stop at. There's obviously 2 boats coming back the other way, locking down. So rather than just staying in the middle of the canal, we moved over and tied to this short dock here to wait for these other 2 boats to lock through. And so the first boat, which was a Locaboat, charter boat, with the same umbrella that we have, I see, came through with not a problem. And Anne had gone ashore, that's Anne up there, to help us once we got in the lock, to be on shore, to catch the lines as we threw them ashore. So we were waiting for the other boat to come through. The other boat came out and then obviously was having a major problems and made a hard left turn, aiming directly for us. And so we backed off the dock here immediately. I mean, this is the dock we were on. And this guy was making a hard left turn, coming straight towards us to T-bone us. We cast the lines off, backed off as quickly as we could, and just got clear as much as we could. And we thought this guy was going to be stuck here forever because his stern was firmly planted on the bank on that side, with the prop wash digging up huge amounts of the side of the canal, and the bow would have been embedded in our boat if we hadn't backed off. And here's Anne, and this local bicyclist. You can see her bike over here on the side of the road. She was biking by when all this was happening. And what did she say, Anne? She said, "Ooh la la." So she jumped off her bike and came over to help. And these guys were obviously charterers as well, because they had no idea how to handle this boat. And they're on shore trying to push off with boat hooks and on here, and they finally got loose and got on their way. And this style of boat was the other type of charter boat actually available on the Nivernais Canal. This is a local company, and we ran into a few of them. They're all named after.
That's a wine.
After
Variety.
that's named after wine. The other ones were named after rodents. There's badger and otter and boats like that. And this is actually the type of boat that our canal boat heroes Tim and Prue chartered when they were on the Nivernais Canal. I can tell you these boats wandered all over the place as much as ours. But it was again a local type of boat. But these boats were steel, so we didn't want to get in any altercations with them. Again, a lunchtime stop because the locks were closed. We stopped for lunch, and this is actually a little lunchtime stop that had a place where we could dump garbage and recycling and all sorts of stuff. And then at this point, because we had some time to kill after lunch, I think Steve and Jenny and Anne took the bikes and went off for a ride, had a look at the local countryside, and then Steve stopped to commune with the local inhabitants, again practicing his French. the with the local wildlife. And actually, I gathered talking to Jenny that Steve stopped to talk to these cattle on the way there, and stopped on the way back. And on the way back, they actually recognized him and came back to talk to him. So we established some long-term bonds, obviously. And on this part of the canal, we ran into our first double lock. All the other locks up to this point have been single locks. You go in, close the gates behind you, let the water in, rise up, open the gates in front of you, and then exit the lock and carry on your way. With a double lock, you entered the lock and did the same thing. But when you entered the gate, open the gates in front of you, you entered a second lock that would take you up another 6, 8, 10 feet. And you can always spot a double lock because the gates obviously were higher for the lock in front of you. And you can see the water rushing in here as the lock's getting filled. Again, an example of one of the other disadvantages of locking up is there's much more turbulent water. So as the water came in, we got to the higher level and then went through this gate. This is us looking now aft to the gate that we just came through into the next lock. And these lock gates were actually closed by a control panel up here, which closed them manually because there's such much heavier gates than the single locks. So once that lock closed, they'd let the water in, and we'd rise up to twice the amount of distance as the first lock. So we were now getting into much more hilly country as we were getting closer to our destination, Corbignan. You can see the panel here the lockmaster used to close these gates. And we arrived at 10A, and as I say, 10A was the Locaboat, sorry, the Locaboat base. And it was probably the least pleasant stop we had. It was not, the Locaboat facilities were somewhat run down, and the town itself, as the other towns, was deserted. And we pulled up along the quay, found a place we could plug in. Every place we stopped, we had electricity to plug into. We had, I guess, I'm not sure it was 110, 220 or whatever, but we had electrical power, and we had also fill up the tanks as well. But this boat here, who pulled in afterwards and Mediterranean moored as the other boats did, that arrived after him, his electrical connection wasn't working. He actually had to borrow ours. He brought his cord over to ours and asked if he could plug into our box, which was not a problem, of course. And we explored the town. It didn't take long. The town wasn't very far away, but again, even though there were cars, there were very few people around. It was just again a deserted town. I don't think did we shop there? I think we must have. There must have, we had tended to buy fresh bread every day, so there must have been some place to move to. So our last day, the sprint to the finish from 10A to Corbignan. Corbignan was 12 miles, 13 locks, and 6 bridges. And we got so good with the locks, by the way, as I think I mentioned, we could get through in about 10 to 12 minutes to do a lock. The British locks would take about 20 minutes because you had to handle them yourselves. We could do a French lock in about 10 minutes. Bridges tended to take a little longer, but not too much longer. And again, you can see here, Steve's gone ashore, has opened this bridge. And again, how tight the passage is under the bridge that we went through. And as we're approaching Corbignan again, which was a base for Locaboat, we started to run into more Locaboat boats also returning to the base. And this was the largest Locaboat available, the largest vessel available in the charter. And this actually had 3 generations of one family on board. You can see it's being steered by the young kid here,
10-year-old.
a 10-year-old steering it into the lock. And this was a family from Hungary. I think it was an Eastern European family. And this 10-year-old was taking into this lock. And this is a challenging entry into the lock because you not only have to hit the entry, but you have to turn as you're going in. And he did it amazingly well. He was quite adept at it. Then he would hop ashore and retrieve lines too. He was very much involved. And this lock was the only lock that we saw that had a restaurant associated with it. So this is the lock keeper's hut. Most of the lock keepers' huts had been abandoned and were in disrepair. Most of the lock keepers used a small sort of shelter to operate from. But this lockkeeper's hut had been converted to a restaurant. We didn't have time to stop, but it was the only time that we saw a restaurant along the canal route. The British canals had pubs all the way along. That's where we ate dinner in the British canals, at pubs. But the French canals had very few restaurants available. This is the only one that we saw. So on the journey home, the afterguard here was quite happy. Steve concentrating on steering, and we're in the lock at this time, so I was taking a picture. But you can see here the canal guide always open, with a pen available here to check off which locks and which bridges that we've gone through. Actually, we must be moving here because the throttle is ahead.
So.
Yeah. So
It's got a grass bank.
Yeah, and so we must be moving at that point. And again, this is our second double lock. Again, it tells the double lock is the height of the gate at the forward end. This lock.
This lady is a lockkeeper.
There, that's lockkeeper.
She's a lockkeeper.
That's lockkeeper. There's the 10-year-old ashore though, taking care of the lines. I'm not sure. He probably got ashore with a ladder, I think. And then they moved forward and made room for us. These are the gates, so we haven't actually entered the lock yet. This lockkeeper's waiting for us to enter the lock to butt up behind this person. Then she'd close these gates. The gates are recessed into the wall, and then she'd let the water in at the front end. So here we are in the higher level of the lock, the next stage. That's the lockkeeper there again, and that's about to enter the final portion of the canal towards our destination. And even after 7 days on the water, we're still happy and smiling. The foredeck crew was hard at work. You can see this is out of lock, obviously, because Anne's got the line around one turn around the cleat to hold us in place while the water enters the lock, and flags happily flying in the breeze. And I included this picture just to prove I really was there. So again, this is on the canals with our Canadian and RHYC Burgundy flying. But the thing we noticed about this part of the canal, it really was just a ditch. This is the part that Steve and I saw when we drove the cars into Corbinier to drop them off to wait our arrival. This is the canal we saw. And we looked at it and said, oh my God, I hope the rest of the trip is better than this, because this was so depressed, recessed in the countryside that you really couldn't see anything around you. And it really was just a ditch to the end. This is real canal type stuff. But this was the only part of the canal that had such restricted views. Most of the canal, with this was usually higher than the surrounding countryside. So we arrived at the Locaboat base at Corbinier. Very helpful, very friendly. They had laundromat available that I took advantage of. They had showers available.
Wi-Fi.
Yeah, more importantly, they had Wi-Fi available, and we communicate with home. Did we have Wi-Fi in the rest of the trip?
Yeah.
No, we had no Wi-Fi, I guess. Yeah. And they were extremely helpful. You can see we've taken down our Canadian flag and Burgundy replaced it with the Locaboat flag here. And and then during the day, of course, we wandered into town. I think we probably drove in the town because we had a car, and walked around. And I should say, bought more food, of course. No, not really.
We did. We must
food?
have the bread because we went for lunch.
Oh yeah, we ate on board, and we wouldn't spend the night on the boat anyway. And this is the World War I war memorial in Corbinier, and I have to say, every town we went to, every town we visited, no matter big or small, had a World War I memorial in the town, and this was an excellent prelude to our trip to Vimy and to Beaumont-Hamel. So it really did demonstrate the devastating effect World War I had on France. Occasionally, they tack on a World War II memorial on these World War I memorials, but generally not. Almost all the memorials were devoted entirely to World War I. And I say we spent the night on the boat at the Locaboat base at Corbinier. I used the laundromat. We utilized showers, I think. We spoke to the other people that were returning boats too. It's got very friendly with some Australians. A lot of Australians on the canals. A lot of them owning their own boats. They'd come over and spend every summer. Every year in Paris, in France, on their boat, and travel throughout the whole canal system in France. And they're quite large boats. In actual fact, because we had the Canadian flag up, we passed one of the Australian boats that was moored off to the side. He popped his head up out of his companionway, saw our flag, and said, "Ahoy, fellow colonials!" and so we got to talking to this Australian family that had chartered the boat. They needed to get to the train station to get back to Paris, and didn't have any transportation. So Steve volunteered to take them up to the train station. So the morning before we left, in our vehicle, or maybe that evening, I can't remember. They all hopped in our van, and Steve drove them up to the train station. So that was the only time we actually intermingled with other charterers, as opposed to England, when you're sort of talking to them all the time. But again, it underlined the whole concept of the French canal charter business caters to visitors more than it does to the locals, and so it was quite a trip. So Feni, it was a 7 days of very relaxed, enjoyable travel. We're now planning our third canal boat trip, Steve, Jenny, and Anne's second. And COVID actually has complicated that somewhat. And we're hoping all to get back to England and do a canal boat trip in England in 2022. And we're hoping that still may happen, but we postponed so many trips in 2021 into 2022. It's going to be a busy year. So.
Okay, so we'll just move along to the question period, and I'll show you how to ask questions. If you just could find the participants, click on raise hand, and we'll take you in order. One thing I noticed, Rob, was did you have solar panels on the boat?
Yes, we did, and I assume they were operational. I didn't. When Eve took us for the test run, I didn't question the power sources in that much detail. But I assume they were operational.
Okay,
and you certainly had enough sun to utilize them.
Okay, then the first person with a question or comment is Laurel. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, I got very excited when you started your presentation, because in 2013, we did a Locaboat charter in Burgundy, but on the Saône Canal from Gray to Branche, and we experienced almost an identical trip. And it was certainly the trip of a lifetime. However, the locks, I think we had about 15 locks, and then the last 3 were totally manual. There was no lock masters, but you pulled a cord as you approached the lock, and you either got a green light or a red light. And the red light indicated that a boat was coming the other way. A green light indicated you were free to go. And once you got into the lock, everything just happened for you. All you had to do was tie off. On the manual locks, the guys actually had to get off the boat and turn the wheels. And at some time it was a little strenuous, but it was exciting. It was very, very exciting. And I thank you for such a wonderful presentation and for bringing back all those wonderful memories for me.
Yeah, the lock systems in France have a variety of different ways to open them. One of the best YouTube programs on locking or canal boating in France is a thing put together by a young couple, a Canadian and a Swiss, and they're taking their sailboat from the Mediterranean up to the Baltic, and it's called
Sailing Magic Carpet.
Sailing Magic Carpet, and the segment about France going through the canal systems in France is called North Through the Continent. If you go on YouTube and just type in North Through the Continent, you get this really phenomenal series of this really pleasant young couple taking a 28-foot sailboat with a mast on deck up through the French canal systems. And as you say, they encounter all these different types of lock systems, from huge commercial locks that are completely manned to locks that are push button operated, and with that little device that you mentioned with pulling the stick up and down to notify the lock. So I mean, canal boating through France is quite an experience.
It is, and we were on the boat, by the way, and everything you said about the boat is true, I think.
Well, it's interesting. When we spoke to when we arrived at Corbinier and started talking to the Locaboat people, it turned out the guy we were talking to, who's the guy that takes care of all their boats, said he used to work for La Boat, and he said the company had changed hands, and that the new owners were in it to make money and get a return on their investment, and they weren't investing as much money and time into the people or the boats. And so he agreed with us that Locaboat was the better of the two companies. But I should add that one of the charters that we're looking at for next September is a La Boat charter on the Rideau Canal.
Okay.
La Boat have upgraded their boats to a brand called Prestige, and those are the boats that they're using on the Rideau. And again, our canal boat heroes, Tim and Prue, did a Rideau Canal charter with La Boat as well. And so that's what we're looking at doing. So La Boat is, I think, trying to upgrade their systems and boats. But I think Locaboat is in France. And if you looked at that map originally, I mean, most of the canal boating is done in France. So Locaboat have operations in Ireland and Germany and Italy and Holland as well.
I heard you're going to rent La Boat on La Trent.
Yes, in actual fact,
they're like, we've been on the Trent several times, and we looked at La Boat. They're like 4 times the price of anybody else.
Okay. So the next person with in line is Jim. Go ahead.
Marvelous talk. Previously, where was Laurel's trip? Just talking about those canals. Where was Laurel?
My trip was on the Saone, and it would have been east and a bit south of where you folks were, as far as I can tell.
Thank you. I think the couple that Bob was talking about was Paul and Cheryl Shard. Is that the Shards that you were talking about, I think?
The ones that did the trip through north to the continent through the French canal system?
Oh, sorry. Well, what was the question?
I think you were talking about Paul and Cheryl Shard.
I don't think so. This is, I'm not even sure if this couple is married.
Yeah, they are. Maya and
Maya, her name's Maya, and his name is, it's an Italian name.
Dini,
He's
Aladino.
Aladino. He's Italian Swiss. She's from British Columbia. And the boat is Magic Carpet. And so, well worth watching. We got it. I mean, they're still producing these videos, because they're now up in the Baltic and up in Holland. We started from day one when they actually bought their boat, which was a write-off at a boat yard, and then Aladino repaired it because he's the boat builder, and then followed them all through the Mediterranean, and now we're following them up through the French canals, and we'll follow them through their adventures in Holland as well.
By the way, we actually buddy boated with a sailboat that was from Sweden, and they were going from north to south to get to the Mediterranean. And it was really, really interesting to get the lay of the land that way, and to understand what they were doing and why and how and everything else. So yeah, it was that's a very, very interesting concept.
Okay, next, Jim, you have another question? Go ahead.
Oh, my actual question is, on your trip, Bob, would you go upstream again if you were to repeat that trip? And
Not out of choice.
where was the headwater of the river?
Yeah, well, that was, again, that was dictated by the time we booked the charter and the fact we're going from, you know, A to B. When we chartered the canal boat in England, because we're operating out of one location, we went up the canal, turned around and came back. So whatever lots we went up, we went down, and vice versa. So we had a good, we weren't, you know, always going up or down. And the English canals generally don't go all the way, you know, they don't have to go very far before you start going up and down again. So, but I would do the trip again in a heartbeat, but I'd rather do other canals before that.
No, but the direction up there.
I'd avoid it. Sorry, the older I get, I avoid
Exactly.
it.
I was only able to lasso the bollard twice in all the times I tried.
Right.
Hard work. I was too short.
Okay, go ahead, Diane.
Okay, Rob, I'd like to thank you and all of your fellow passengers so much. I did have a couple of questions, pertinent perhaps. One of them is, how much did this trip cost you?
Oh.
Just a ballpark figure, because I recognize you've got the car costs and
Jenny will know exactly.
I really can't remember. I mean, when the trip cost us, you know, when you talk about airfares and everything else, it adds up. But the actual charter of the canal boat wasn't that expensive, I don't think. Jenny, do you remember what it cost, or Steve?
Steve had to go. He's working.
Okay.
Now, you had the spreadsheet. Do you remember the cost?
It was, I mean, for the whole, I'm guessing 3,000 to 4,000 euros, dollars. I don't know.
Okay. Well, don't worry about that.
I can send it to you, Diane.
Okay, and I'm planning to include in the next missive, I'm going to try and include the Mia and Aldino link, if I can find it, and a couple of other things. The Seafarer's current presentation, from the current, I'll send that as well. But I did have another couple of questions. Do you prefer the UK or the French canals?
That's a personal choice. My preference is actually the British canals, primarily because you get the feeling you're part of a community. And you know the
restaurants.
Well, the pubs specifically, even though they never had. You know, you always got the pub, and you ordered the steak and Stilton pie, and they said, "Oops, just served the last one. I'm sorry." But the fact that majority of people are English speaking, which helped, and the fact that you're part of the community and you're welcomed as part of that community. They didn't look down on hire boats generally. And then as soon as they find out. Well, they assumed right off the bat we were American, not Canadian. They were always embarrassed when we told them they were Canadian and apologized. And again, they always asked if we knew their cousin in Calgary. But it was a sense of community. Whereas on the French canals, you were basically on your own.
And that was really odd that there were so few people out and about.
It was bizarre.
Yeah.
Bizarre. I mean, the towns looked abandoned.
But they seem to live by shutting their shutters. I remember was in Clumsy, which was the town that actually had shops open, and we were going down this little roadway that was a narrow street. And as we went down this slight hill, I saw this lady at my eye level, and she put her hands out and she pulled her shutters in to close the window. So, I mean, there must have been people in behind those shutters. But they shut off the world. And so you were always looking at closed shutters.
Wow. Well, really interesting. Last question, before I close this whole session. Mistletoe is a parasite, is it not?
Yes.
Correct.
So it was actually growing in clumps on those trees.
Up in the trees.
Well, and we saw
That's
a lot
normal.
of it. I included that picture because it included the mistletoe, but everywhere we went, we saw mistletoe.
Isn't that interesting?
It's all over Europe.
Well, I'm going to close this session off now because it's been amazing, but it's actually 2:30.
Diane, can I just?
Long time. It was wonderful. I felt like I was there with you. So thank you all for joining us once again and sharing your experiences with us. I also would like to note that Marg Taylor has broken her ankle and is in pretty bad shape. I presume she would welcome the odd email if you happen to have her email, and or phone call if you have contact with her at all. I also wanted to note that I have our first speaker for the fall. I haven't booked him in on the first week, but the second week, Paul Smith, and he has found the shoreline of Lake Iroquois. Lake Iroquois is, I presume, the former name of Lake Ontario. And so this is thousands and thousands of years, but he's gone through Toronto and actually has found the shoreline. And he is delighted to come and speak to us in the fall. So I am really excited because I contacted him and he immediately got back to me and said, oh, I'd love to do that. I never thought of reaching out to sailors. So there we are. We've got our first speaker. And coming up next week, we have Doreen Green, and she's going to be talking to us about cruising from Moscow to St. Petersburg. Never done that. So that's another canal river kind of cruise. And then on March 10th, I'm hoping, and this may change because I've also had a contact with Danielle Doggett from the SEBA project to give us an update on that. And we just haven't fixed a date, but we're sort of looking at having the Royal Clipper and the end of the videos of the Royal Clipper, or it might be Danielle Doggett. It depends on how we juggle those last couple of speakers. So with that, I remind you about the breakout rooms afterwards if you still have a bit of time, and the pipes out.